Welcome to Veterans in Transition, where we promote the veteran community. Each week, we travel around the region highlighting veteran-related news, issues, and events. Retired General Larry Spencer, United States Air Force, connected with colleague and friend, former Commander, Air Combat Command, Retired General Hawk Carlisle, United States Air Force, in this episode of Generally Speaking.
Well, in addition to your very distinguished Air Force career, you're currently the president and CEO of the National Defense Industrial Association, NDIA. And so that's pretty exciting. So before we talk about your Air Force career, why don't you tell us a little bit about NDIA? What is it? What does the organization do? And what is your role in the organization?
Okay, it's great. NDIA, it's a 501c3 nonprofit, and our objective is to bring government, both the military and the executive branch and Congress, together with industry and academia to solve those most difficult problems in support of the warfighters out there, those young men and women that raise their right hand and swear an oath to our Constitution. So we work with, we have about 1,800 corporate members, industry corporate members that are part of the defense industrial base. We build coalitions. We work with Congress on legislation. We work with the department on regulations. And we work with industry on bringing new technology to the forefront with academia and the national labs. Again, with the ultimate objective is to have a vibrant, strong, resilient, and the best in the world defense industrial base that supports our young men and women out there doing the nation's business. It's a great opportunity. And as a CEO, I'm a president and CEO, so I have about 80 permanent staff here in Washington, D.C. And then we have chapters which are geographically located. And then we have divisions that are functionally aligned. So we have the great advantage of having both geographic spread across the country as well as functional spread across the different mission sets.
That's great. Actually, I wasn't aware of this before I looked at your bio a couple of weeks ago, but you were born and raised in California. What was that like? What was it like growing up in California?
Now, so I'm a Southern California boy. I guess one of the greatest things about California is there's so much to do. So I'd surf in the summertime and fall and spring. I would go scuba diving or snorkeling down in Mexico. I'd go up to Mammoth or Big Bear and ski in the wintertime. So it's a great place to live, a lot to do. I grew up in San Diego in the late 60s, early 70s. I'm dating myself a little bit. So as you can imagine, it was post-Vietnam, and California is fairly liberal, so it was a pretty interesting place to grow up when I was a kid. Great family, and we had I love California. It's a great place.
I almost hate to ask you this, but I grew up on the opposite coast around the same time, and without going into a lot of detail, in the 70s, I was the big afro, the bell-bottom pants, the high platform shoes. I gotta think you were doing something similar on the West Coast. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that was certainly the crowd I ran with. I will tell you, my dad was a little bit strict, so long hair really wasn't an option. The first time I actually let my hair grow past my ears was after I'd been accepted to the Air Force Academy, and I kept telling my dad, I go, "Dad, they're going to shave my entire head. Just let me grow it for a little while." So about the last 6 months of high school, he let me have my hair a little bit longer. But the dress was pretty much the same. I think platform shoes, wide lapels, big belts. That was all part of the look.
You mentioned the academy, and you're an Air Force Academy graduate of class of '78, which is a really distinguished class. I'm just curious, what got you interested in the Air Force Academy? Why did you choose that route?
So that's people always ask me, they go, "Did you go to the Air Force Academy because you wanted to fly?" And I guess just the nature of the family I grew up in, I had not been in an airplane in my life until I flew from San Diego to Colorado Springs to go to the Air Force Academy. So it really wasn't a love of flying. It was pretty liberal back here. And at the time, youngest of four kids, dad was a truck driver. So we were very much low into the economic spectrum. I was going to college counselors. I did pretty well in school. And my dad one day said, "Hey, son, you ought to go to college. I can't help you, so you got to figure it out yourself." And I just happened to meet a academy liaison officer at one of the job fairs or college fairs rather, and he said, "Have you ever thought about the Air Force Academy?" And I said, "I haven't thought about it. Don't know anything about it." Nobody from my school had gone, so it was kind of a why don't I try it? And so I started applying to senators and my congressmen.
So, as a leader, as a CEO and president, how are you dealing with the current virus? How are you running your company when in the midst of a national pandemic?
So actually, in a lot of ways, we're the staff and NDIA is working harder now than we did before because we're doing everything via Zoom and Microsoft Teams and Ring Central. But what we're really trying to do, our objective is national security of this country. And so we're spending a lot of time talking to Congress on the stimulus packages. We're spending a lot of time, 3 times a week at least. I'm talking to OSD and usually more than that about things like progress payments and how do you support the industrial base, the critical infrastructure essentiality that Secretary Lord claimed and annotated for the defense industrial base. So we're spending a lot of time on how do we make sure that when we come out the other side of this, and I'm confident we will come out the other side of this, how do we ensure that our defense industrial base is still as strong and vibrant and the best in the world as it is now? So we're working really hard with our industry partners and government to make sure that we're doing everything we can to support the workforce, the work that's done, so that we can support those warfighters out there.
And how's your workforce adapting? Are they, what I have found is interesting, everybody wants to work from home until you're forced to work from home every day. And then all of a sudden, folks are anxious to get back to work. So how is your workforce? Because your work, you personally and the folks that work for you, in the course of your work, you do a lot of traveling. So how are you and your staff adjusting to this sort of, work from home?
Yeah, so that's a great point. So we do a lot of travel and we do a lot of events. We put on things like SOFIC and IHSIC. And as you know, those aren't happening. I will tell you, we're doing things virtually. We're doing a virtual SOFIC, which is a Special Operations Forces industry conference in May. And so we're still doing a lot. Unfortunately, some of the revenue is drying up a little bit, as you might imagine. The workforce, I think you're right. I think, the working from home's got its advantages, but, I'm one of them. We're social people. We like interaction. We like to see people. We like to talk about different things. And it's just more conducive in person. So I think the workforce is doing a great job. They're staying really busy. They're working hard on everything. But people are feeling the isolation, the not having that social contact. I for one crave it because I am a social person, and I think being around people is good for people. It's good for you. It expands you. It makes you better people and better Americans, better human beings, better people as you move forward. So it is a challenge for the workforce.
So as you look into the summer and the fall, there's some who think we could get a second wave sometime in the fall. So in the short term, let's assume that things sort of calm down in the summer. What do you see? How would you define what the new normal is?
That's a great question. I think it's going to change people's behavior. I think one of the things that'll be a great, interesting study is how it affects the psyche of people. What do they think? As I said earlier, I think people are social. They want to be around other people. But will their pattern of behavior change? Will shaking hands go away and elbow bumps become the norm? Will people, continue to social distance or not? I do believe I do believe we'll get to the other side of it. I think it's going to take time. You know, after 9/11, people said, we're not going to fly airlines anymore. Well, that clearly wasn't true, and it was impractical. I think with respect to people interacting with each other, it's impractical to think we'll do everything virtually or remotely. That's just, it's not going to happen, but it will change the psyche of people. And I think it'll take a period of time to understand what that really is. You know, this summer, I think there's going to be a lot of nervousness. There's going to be a lot of people that are reluctant to go out, but there's going to be a lot of science and data. There's going to be therapeutics. There's going to be, hopefully, as we work closer to a vaccine by next year. So all that's going to be part of the calculus. And then there's going to be people that, there's still the 25-year-olds that think they're invincible, that are going to want to go out and be around things and want to go to events. We at NDIA are thinking ahead. We're thinking about, doing hybrid, where we do part virtual, part in person, where we alternate groups, kind of a blue silver, and we do some virtual and the other are actual, and vice versa. And if we can do something all virtual, what does that look like? And is that the right way to go? And will we ever do again things that are just all in person and there's no virtual piece to it? So we're looking at all those things as we move forward at NDIA.
And since we both grew up we were in high school in the early '70s, maybe we can stay 6 feet apart and throw up the peace sign like they did back in the old days. And just keep it moving. I have talked to a lot of young folks, high schools, junior high schools, students, and I know you have as well. And when I talk to them and describe the Air Force, particularly if I describe or show pictures or videos of fighter aircraft, the speed, the afterburner, the excitement of a fighter aircraft, I get an interesting reaction. There are some folks who say, boy, I really would love to do that. And there are other folks that say, no way am I getting in a jet moving that fast. What inspired you? What motivated you to want to be a fighter pilot?
Well, I love flying. I think, like you, I did athletics quite a bit in my younger days in high school and the academy. So I think I love flying. And I got it when I started flying. Once I got to the academy, and I got orientation rides in T-33s and gliders, and then I got to do powered flight in T-41s. I just fell in love with flying. I mean, I just thought it was so much fun. It's an athletic event in a lot of ways because you're thinking the whole time. You got to keep your mind moving, and at the same time, you're thinking in 3 dimensions. Up, down, left, right, forward, back, and you're also maintaining what in the fighter world is called situational awareness, where you know what's going on around you. Like a running back that has eyes in the back of his head and he knows when the guy's coming, or a quarterback that knows when a blind side hit's coming. So I think the athleticism to it, that I think is a big part of it, and then just the flying. And once you do it and you kind of get into it, it becomes something that you go, I really love this. I would say, though, that although I love flying, and unfortunately I don't get to fly fighters anymore, which is sad, but that's the nature of the beast. I was blessed to have, thousands and thousands of hours of flying time. But I love the mission. And the bigger mission of the U.S. military and national security, and the people that you get to do it with. I mean, the folks that I grew up with in the fighter community, they're my brothers and sisters, and I do anything in the world for them, and I know they do anything in the world for me. There's just a camaraderie there, and a sense of mission that you're doing something that's bigger than yourself, and you're doing it for a greater good. So, and you get to do any mission in the U.S. military that we do encompasses doing something that matters, and doing it with just incredible people. So that's kind of what, the flying part of it was something that it just suited me. I just loved it, and I loved the athleticism and the thinking part of it. Couldn't overthink it because you're doing 500 miles or 600 miles an hour, so you couldn't overthink it. You had to make decisions, but you had to keep track of what you were doing and where you're going. And I just fell in love with that.
Now, one of the things that folks watching this may not be aware of is pilots, particularly Air Force pilots, or I guess in any service, but fighter pilots in particular, you all have a call sign, which is essentially a name you go by. And there's operational reasons for that, because in a lot of cases, you don't want your actual name going out over the speakers as you're talking back and forth from the airplane. Your call sign is Hawk. Where did that come from?
So I don't tell the story to many people. There's two portions of it. There's what most people would consider the widely known reason, and then there's kind of a story that, when you get a call sign in what's called a call sign party in a squadron, there's stories that come out. And so there's a story that aided in my being called Hawk. So the way it started was on a particular event, a couple of sorties. They usually try to name you based on something that happens when you're going through qualification training, when you're going through mission ready qualification training. So I had a couple of missions where, maybe by luck, maybe I was looking in the right place at the right time, I was able to get visuals, tally-hos as it's called, on my opposition air, the practice red air that I was flying against. So I could see them a long ways away, and I was kind of helping the whole flight by being able to see people and get folks reacting to it. So the comment was, yeah, you got eyes like a hawk. You can see everybody everywhere, which is where Hawk started. And then the other half of the story was a bar in a foreign country where somebody challenged me to get a phone number from a young lady in a bar. And I was able to come back with a phone number, and somebody made the comment of it was like a hawk picking a rabbit out from a field, that he was able to find a girl and get a phone number. So that's kind of that was an additive story to the Hawk call sign as time went on.
One of the things that I had the honor of doing, and is that when you took over command, you were the commander of Pacific Command out in the Pacific in Hawaii, and then you were asked to take over command of Air Combat Command at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia, which is at the time was the largest command in the Air Force. Responsible for all the fighters, bombers, ISR. I mean, just a huge command, huge responsibility. Essentially right on the front lines for the country. And because the chief of staff was, I believe he was having surgery, I had the honor of coming down to officiate your change of command ceremony. And what I remember about that, and I don't know if you remember this or not, when I was, for those of you that don't know, it's a really neat ceremony. It's fairly quick because you want the troops in the command to always have their commander. And so the ceremony is purposely quick because you want the commanders to change out quickly so you can go right back to work. And so I remember handing you the flag on the stage, and the look in your eye was, you were so proud. You were so, I don't even know how to describe it. I mean, it was like you were on cloud nine. It was like you had trained your whole life for this job, and you just could not wait to get the ceremony over so you could get to work. So I'm just speculating based on what I saw for that few seconds on the stage. But tell us what was going through your mind as you were about to take over the premier warfighting command in the Air Force.
You may get me emotional here, Larry. It was an incredible honor. I mean, I never thought, I joke, most people that I went to the academy with and I was a young fighter pilot with, the promotion to 4-star wasn't as much as a shock as me making captain. They didn't think I'd get that far. So I never in a million years dreamed that I would ever have the opportunity to lead the incredible men and women of Air Combat Command. The other thing, I was the youngest of 4 kids. My dad died really early, unfortunately. But sitting in the front row, that's why I get emotional, was my 90-year-old mother. And when I was a kid, I got to tell you, I had some medical issues. I had something on my brain that was a hematoma. And there were times in my life when, early in my life, fourth, fifth grade, when my mom didn't think I'd drive a car. Um, but man, was she supportive. And I have two older sisters and an older brother who were incredibly, my brother's a retired Master Chief from the Navy who did, 17 cruises or seven. I mean, he was just an incredible guy, my older brother, and somebody that I look up to constantly. My nieces and nephews, my godchildren, my daughter, and my grandchildren were all there. So I think I had 32 family members in the audience. So the idea that I could represent our family, my dad and mom, who gave me so much, in a position that could make so much of a difference for our country and national security, and for the 100,000 plus members of the Air Combat Command, that I could help them do what they wanted to do in life. So what was going through my head was, I am incredibly blessed and fortunate to be in this position, and I am going to do everything in my power to do it right. And I've told this to many people. The two things that I ask myself every morning getting up, and every night before I went to bed, is, am I worthy of these young men and women that are serving? Do I do everything I can to be worthy of them following me and my leadership? And does it demonstrate to them what they can do and become? And do I live up to the legacy of those who came before me, to include my family? Those two minds were running through my head as you handed me that flag. And by the way, it was an honor and a privilege, consider how close friends we are and how much I think of you, to have you officiate at my change of command. So I was thinking, you have this opportunity, do everything humanly possible and in your power to live up to those two goals, be worthy of those young men and women, and live up to the legacy of those who came before you.
Well, that was great, Hawk. I appreciate you sort of pouring out your feelings there. I really appreciate it. You mentioned our friendship. One of the assignments that we both had that allowed us to build on that friendship was when you were director of legislative liaison in the Pentagon. And for anyone who doesn't know, I was the budget director, which for the Air Force, which meant I spent a lot of time on the Hill with the appropriators, and General Carlisle, who ran the entire legislative liaison for the entire Air Force, worked with both appropriators and authorizers. So he had the whole group. And he and I spent a lot of time, riding in the car over to the Hill and sitting in meetings with both senators and congressmen talking about various subjects. And I really appreciated your camaraderie during that time. As you know, there had previously been some separation between the two, the budget and legislative liaisons, and liaison, you and I sort of just put that aside, and we all both worked together. But tell us a little bit about, because that was always a fascinating experience for me, particularly as I look back on it, dealing with members on the Hill, senators, congressmen. What was that like for you?
Yeah, and again, your friendship, your camaraderie, your help, your mentorship to me as I worked my way through that. I'd done it before you had too. I'd been the deputy director before that, so I knew what it was like. But your friendship and mentorship and being able to work with you so closely, knowing what ultimately we're doing is trying to help the Air Force and help those airmen out there doing the mission. It was fascinating. I got to tell you, I talk to people about this. I've had some great jobs in the Air Force, but I think, like you, the amount I learned when I was L&L, I got to work with different chiefs and different secretaries. Obviously, you and I got to work across both sides of the aisle with the staffers as well as the members, both in the House and the Senate. And it was just unbelievable how much you learned doing that. You not only learned about the legislative branch and the process and the personalities and how it works, but you also learned so much about your service, because you had to get to a level of detail where you're conversing on so many different things inside of your service. And again, my hat's off to you, Larry, because you became brilliant, whether you were, and one of the great reasons and one of the strengths I think you had going into being the vice chief was you could talk about anything from EOD to space assets to intelligence surveillance to bombers to transportation to TWICF to, I mean, there was nothing you couldn't talk about because I'm sure a lot of that you learned when you were FMB. And that's the way I felt. It was a fascinating job and it was incredibly educational. It was challenging and painful. I will tell you, I walked away with one thing, and I think you'd say the same thing. As a general rule, those folks, whether they're staffers or members that are in the legislative branch of government, are great Americans, all of them. And they're trying to do the right thing. I mean, there's a rare exception, but as a general rule, they're great Americans and they're trying to do the right thing. They're trying to do the right thing from where they sit. And so you're in my job, which hopefully we did okay, was to educate them on our point of view. And then obviously they were going to go out and do what they needed to do. But that's one thing I sometimes get discouraged by is we get a little bit caught up with anti-politician rhetoric. Politics is a necessary part of a free and democratic society, and you got to listen to them. It's it's the way a democratic Republican republic works, and so I think you have to have an understanding of what they're doing, what they're going through, what they're trying to do, and that they're great Americans and they're trying to do the right thing. They're just doing it from their perspective. And I, again, think that our job, national security, and what you and I were doing and what I do now, and what to a large extent you do now, is it's a bipartisan issue. Everybody is on that same sheet of music and defending this country and our way of life and our values. And so that part of it, I think, was just fascinating. I really, really enjoyed the job.
Yeah, one of the things I remember, I don't know if you remember, but I'll remind you, we were both 2-stars at the time, and you and I both, coincidentally, were over on the Hill at the same time with the Chief of Staff at the time, General Schwartz. You and I both were recommended for a 3rd star at the same time. And you and I were together waiting to accompany General Schwartz to see some member of Congress. And he pulled us both aside in a little room in the Capitol and told us both we had been selected for a 3rd star, which is something I'll always remember. But along those lines, and you sort of reminded me of this while you were talking there, our country, for various reasons, is very divided. And I've known you for at least 20 years, probably more, and we've been through a lot together. What's interesting, though, in the military, I don't know what your politics are, and you don't know what you don't know if I'm a Democrat, independent, or Republican. And the fascinating thing is, it doesn't matter. I don't care. And if we were to have a political discussion and you disagreed with my political views, it still wouldn't matter. We would still be friends. So without getting into the politics of one side or the other, what do you think our society and our politicians in general can learn from that lesson from the military? Because, as you know, we go through our whole careers, we're focused on a mission. We don't care what you think about politics. We are brothers and sisters in arms, period. And whether you're a Republican or Democrat or independent does not matter. What do you think the country can learn from us who have served in the military?
Yeah, Larry, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I think that sense of camaraderie, sense of mission brings us all together. And again, we're not going to agree on everything, even in sense of priorities and missions. We don't agree on everything, and that's fine. I couldn't agree more that one of the most devastating, and we know our adversaries are fueling this, is a divide in this country. We know that certainly the Chinese and the Russians are trying to, and Iranians and North Koreans to some extent, are trying to foster that divide inside this country, and it's horrible. It's the worst outcome possible, because ultimately we're a free, open, democratic society with a set of values that means that everybody's got their point of view, everybody's got their opinion, and we have to come consensus. We have to make compromise, and then we have to move forward. As the saying goes, if you don't make any decision at all, that you have 0% chance of being right. So you got to make decisions and move forward. So I think one of the things, we did well, and certainly within different mission areas inside the Air Force, between the different services inside the Department of Defense, we all wanted something. I wanted more fighters, more ISR, and more bombers, and John Hyten and Jay Raymond wanted more satellites and more, comm and cyber, and Darren McDew wanted more tankers and more airlift. But we compromised and came to a conclusion. And the Army and the Air Force disagree on things. They come to a conclusion, and they come to a compromise, and you move forward. So I think consensus, compromise, understanding that everything's not going to go your way. I talked about it the other day, and basically there's the red line that says we can't accept this, and the other end of the line that says, that's exactly what I want to get everything I want. And the distance between those two lines is where the politicians have to come to consensus and work it out. They got to accept the fact that they're not going to get everything they want, just like we didn't in the services or different functional areas in the Air Force. And the other thing you got to say is it can't be a red line of everything I want or nothing. So you got to find that ability to get to compromise. And I think, and you and I grew up with some great statesmen from both sides of the aisles. I mean, Dan Inouye and Ted Stevens, Shelton and Warner and Duncan Hunter Sr. There were statesmen that could work those compromises, and they're from both sides of the aisle. And I think we need more of our legislative branch to get to that level where the red line and the nirvana, everything I want, are far enough apart, and there's enough negotiation and compromise room in between that they can come up with a solution that's going to be good for the American people and good for the future of this country. So the divide to me is the worst thing, and I'll just say this, the worst possible thing that can happen out of this crisis that we're going through. Two things. The first worst thing is that it further divides this country. That would be horrible. And we just can't let that happen. And then the second thing is that our adversaries out there turn this against us, and through propaganda, turn other countries in the world more towards their sphere and away from our values and our sphere. And so those are the two things that we cannot let happen as a result of this crisis we're going through. And the politicians have got to come and understand where compromise exists.
Yeah, agree 100%. You've been very generous with your time. Let me ask you just two more questions. The first one, because I think the audience would be interested in hearing your views on leadership, because you're a great leader. You're a proven leader, both in peacetime and wartime. And if you could, and I know it's hard to do because leadership cannot be boiled down into, your top two or three. It's much more complicated than that. But what is sort of, if you would think about over the years, your top two or three leadership characteristics that you wanted to portray and that you taught your subordinates to follow, what would you offer to folks, especially new leaders trying to develop their own leadership style? What did you find that was really effective in developing your own leadership style?
That's a great question, and I've actually thought about this question because I think that our ability to be worthy of those that are under our command is so incredibly important, and earning their respect is a big part of that. I guess there are kind of three things that I'd say. First of all, is I'm a firm believer in the more you learn, the less you know. As you get smarter, you know more and more that you don't know things, and I think your ability to listen and learn is incredibly important. You and me, when I was the programmer and FM and you and across the spectrum, the ability to pay attention to those around you and learn from them. And I will tell you, I learned this in every command I ever had. When I went out and talked to the folks, whether it was an 18-year-old airman or a 4-star general or a chief master sergeant that had been around for 30 years, I learned something from every single one of them. You just have to be quiet and pay attention and actually listen. So the practice of listening and speak less and listen more. So I do think the two worst possible characteristics in a leader are arrogance and hubris. And so your ability to know that you don't know everything and to be quiet and listen to those around you, the more you learn, the less you know. And so I'm a big believer in that humility and listening to people and know that everywhere you go, you can learn from somebody. The second thing I'd say is attitude. And it's a fine line. It's something that you have to learn to walk because there's either end of the spectrum, and some people don't remember this term, some do, but you can be Pollyannish, where everything's beautiful, everything's wonderful. You're a high-speed cheerleader. And that's unrealistic, and people see through that in an instant. And there's also the other end of the spectrum where, you're Chicken Little. The sky's falling, everything's terrible, nothing's going to work out, and complain. And so I think as a leader, you got to find that attitude that says, hey, there's some bad things out there that we got to work on, things we're not doing right. But guess what? We can do it because we got great people and we got some of these things going for us, and we're going to work our way through it. So finding that attitude line where you're positive, you can motivate people and get them going the right direction, but you're pragmatic and realistic and understand what you're not doing well and what you don't know. And then the last thing I'd say is it's all about relationships. It's easy to look at somebody that came from your background, looks like you, talks like you, thinks like you, and have a relationship. Being able to build the relationship across the spectrum, and you have to work at it. It's not easy to go find people that disagree with you, to go find people that don't look like you, don't come from your background, didn't have that same, learn from their diversity, learn from their background and what they had. Goes back to the more you learn, the less you know. So building relationships with people that you have to work at it, because the amount you can take out of that, the amount of respect you can gain, the amount of understanding you can have from other points of view by working on relationships, and no kidding, working on them. So what I used to tell folks is, if it comes naturally, nurture that, keep it, make it happen. That's a great relationship. If you have to work at it, that's even better. Because that means you're willing to put the investment in to make that relationship work as you go forward. And you won't always agree. You may not even necessarily think that highly of each other, but you got to build a relationship so you can work together. So those are kind of the more you learn, the less you know. Got to have the right attitude on a fine line, and it's all about relationships.
Well, that's great. So let's end on a lighter note. A mutual friend of ours recently purchased a brand new Corvette, a Corvette that's not even on the market yet. And he actually was able to order directly from the CEO of General Motors. You're a Corvette guy. How did you become a Corvette guy? And it probably that may not be unusual, I guess, for a fighter pilot. And two, are you going to buy the new Corvette?
Great question. So I am jealous of our friend having the C8, the mid-engine, which is a new thing for the Corvette. I mean, a mid-engine Corvette. My brother's a motorhead. He can make, build, or fix anything. So we've talked about it a lot, and he's very interested. As a matter of fact, my current Corvette I bought from my brother. I'm on my fifth. And the one I bought is a 2013. It was the last of the C6s. It's a 2013 Grand Sport. 60th anniversary edition, and I love that car. It's a gorgeous car, but the mid-engines are great. I think I got my loves of Corvette way back when I was a young kid. My dad was an identical twin, and one of his twin sons, Gary, came out to visit us, and he ended up staying and moving from Iowa to San Diego. And he bought a Corvette, and my brother was in the Navy at the time, and he was back in Oceana, Virginia. So I'd hang out because my brother wasn't there. Gary and my brother were fairly close in age and very good friends. So I'd hang out with Gary a lot, and he had a Corvette. And he actually let me drive it once, which was phenomenal. And I kind of started going, oh man, I want one of these. And then my brother, who is a huge motorhead, again, he can make, fix, build anything in the world. He was a Corvette guy, so I kind of got into it naturally, and then I just think it's a great car, and Like I said, I love my 2013, but I am jealous of the C8. That is a nice looking mid-engine car. That's pretty cool.
Well, General Hawk Carlisle, thank you so much for your time. You're a great American, a great patriot, a great warfighter, and most importantly to me, a great friend. So thank you so much for your service to our country in the military and the service you continue to provide to our country through NDIA. Thank you so much for your time.
Larry, the honor's been all mine. I consider you a brother, and thank you very much. It's been great talking to you again, and I'm glad we only live a few miles apart so we can talk to each other all the time. It's great to see you, my friend.
All right, thanks a lot.
That's all for this edition of Veterans in Transition. We ask that you like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter and Instagram. This is no ordinary day. Flow in the spirit of your own life. Remember, we all have a story to tell. Until next time.